Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Anita Fain Taylor, the Director of Economic and Business Development. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge our elected officials. They are not present, but they may be present online, and I wanted to recognize them. Mayor Wayne Messam, Vice Mayor Yvette Colburn, Commissioner Winston Barnes, Commissioner Maxwell Chambers, and Commissioner Alexandra Davis. We're privileged to be here tonight and privileged to have with us from our City Manager's Office, Assistant City Manager Sean Gale, and she will come up and offer words of welcome. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sean Gale, Assistant City Manager. On behalf of our City Manager, Mr. Hargrave, Deputy City Manager, Mr. Gordon, and our other Assistant City Manager, Mr. Baker, welcome to the forum this afternoon. Glad you're able to join us. It's interesting when you talk about opportunity zones and what it means to our community. It is critical that we get that word out and we help people understand that if you are in an opportunity zone, what it means to you and how you can take advantage of the benefits that come with being in an opportunity zone. So it is our pleasure to be convening this forum to get this word out to the community. Thank you for your time. We know you've worked hard and you're here with additional time, and we certainly appreciate it. And we're hoping that you can identify the benefits of the opportunity zones and how you can interact with this great opportunity to better your businesses. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Anita?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, who is an expert in the area. Clarence Williams represents and advocates for a wide range of clients before Congress and federal executive branch agencies. Clients rely on Clarence's policy and political acumen, gained over 15 plus years of dedicated public service to help them navigate potential pitfalls in government regulations, procurement, and legislation. A former chief of staff of Congressman Kendrick B. Meek, he served as the Congressman's chief policy advisor and strategist on all matters before the U.S. House of Representatives. He directly managed the Congressman's portfolio of issues relating to the committees on Ways and Means, Armed Services, Homeland Security, and Budget. Specifically, Clarence specialized in issues involving opportunity zones, healthcare, armed services, taxation, alternative energy, local government issues, education, and domestic and international trade. Among those Clarence has and does proudly represent are the Florida municipalities of Miami Gardens, North Miami, Palatka, West Park, and Opa-locka, among others. He has worked with these and other clients. He works off of his personal mantra that government will do things for you or to you, based on how well you understand how it works. He believes his primary job is to give his clients the secrets of how government works for you. A dynamic speaker who is able to decipher and interpret highly complex policy matters for all audiences. He is well versed on procurement, education, and general government process. Clarence is also a frequent speaker on the Qualified Opportunity Zone program. Please help me welcome Clarence Williams of the Becker Law Firm. Thank you.
Well, most of that is true. I am Clarence Williams, and very, very pleased to be here with you this evening. This was a particular honor and a privilege. As I was telling one of you just now, I'm from Miramar, just across the university in the, I don't know if it's still referred to as the Knowles area, but was born in Hollywood. I am the son of a United States Air Force veteran, and after he got out, we retired back here in Miramar before I went off to school at Florida State. I was a pre-med major when I got to Florida State, and broke my parents' heart when I started as a part-time job working for a law firm that did government relations. It was interesting. And next thing I know, a position came open in the Florida legislature. I took that job, worked there for 7 years for the minority leader of the Florida Senate. And one of my members at the time, Kendrick Meek, went to Congress, called me up at 12:15 in the morning after he got up to Washington, D.C. and said, hey, what are you doing for the next few years of your life? And that's how I ended up in Washington, D.C. My dad still hasn't quite forgiven me for this. You know, it's been 30 odd years now, but we are where we are. As Anita mentioned, we sat on the Ways and Means Committee when we were up in Congress. And additionally, when I was in the Florida Senate, I worked on the Finance Committee. Both of those dealt with tax issues. And one of the things that I was fortunate to find out early is you can provide more incentive in tax policy to get folks to do the things you want them to do than you can in other statutory means by, you know, stick and carrot. Tax policy goes mostly on carrot and occasionally with stick, but it is a good way to provide a reason for folks to do the things that you want. There is never a disagreement on what happens with your wallet. And so you can find wide and pretty comprehensive agreement from both sides of the aisle, you know, big, tall, small, whatever, on those things that are necessary to protect our wallets and our quality of life. So a few years back, I'm that lame guy that still watches policy. And I was just reading through the tax pieces on the 2017 bill passed in the Congress, and came up on this one section. It was literally a 2-page section of law that referred to qualified opportunity zones. I read it, and the literally 10 minutes it took me to read it, and I was like, okay, we've done things similar to this in the past. Thank you. Similar to this in the past, but this offers the opportunity for private investors to put money where they want to put it to the benefit of local communities. There was a couple of, second here. Okay, there we go. There were a couple of members in particular that have been talking about this for a while, and the concept wasn't new to 2017. This had been bandied about for probably 3 or 4 years before Senator Scott from South Carolina, Tim Scott, and Senator Booker from New Jersey got together and decided this is a way for us to figure out how to get private investment into the communities that need them most. The idea was to take advantage of what we feel like was $6 trillion. Hold on here, got all kinds of funny things happening.
It's okay.
Here we go, we're back. Take advantage of $6 trillion that's floating out there in unrealized gains. Typically what happens is you put something, you know, whether it's stock or land or whatever that thing is, and you sit it there and it sits there for years. You may or may not try to liquidate it, but if you do, you pay taxes on it, you move on, or you go to the next thing. $6 trillion of that was sitting and has been sitting for years and years and years. And this was an incentive to get folks to take that $6 trillion, as much of it as we could possibly get to move around, to be a little bit more dynamic in its usage. Created a tremendous investment opportunity for folks of wealth and of meager means that had the spare money to be able to do some of these things. It was a huge new tool to mobilize that investment into the communities that needed it most. The law itself was fairly simple. And that's why it was particularly aggravating. And I will say this as a former policy guy, if you read a piece of law, if you're ever bored enough to read a piece of law, and you can read it in one sitting, it is going to take forever to implement. And that was the case with opportunity zones. It took probably the better part of a week to actually draft out the substantive language. It took
Every time you
about 2 years to get the regulatory structure down.
given rights again.
But what the bill did primarily, first thing it did is it gave the governors of each state, as well as the governors of territories, the ability to designate communities within their states or within their territories as opportunity zones. They were given loose criteria. They're looking for those communities that are underrepresented, that are underinvested in, where the economy has become stagnant, where joblessness is greater than other places. And those are the areas that we wanted to look at. There were some 8,700 communities designated around the country. 467 of those were designated by then Governor Scott here in the state of Florida. And I will say this as an aside, and Miramar is particularly one of these. The criterion for these zones, for the most part, were built around dealing with communities rather than industrial areas. And so what you had, and this is something we're still trying to work around a little bit here, is these were built around housing communities. Miramar is one such example. There's not a lot of industrial area in the area that is located, inside this opportunity zone. So folks have to be somewhat artful in how they do things. I'll talk about this a little bit more later. But one of the things that we're still waiting for regulatory information on is for areas like this, the IRS issue that's not yet been dealt with is the idea of what is considered in and outside of the zone for purposes of getting the tax incentive. 90% of what you do as a qualified opportunity zone business, and we'll talk about this some more as well, has to happen inside the zone. What we have not yet determined, and we being the IRS, is what constitutes outside the zone for purposes of this tax incentive. Now, if you're up in Escambia or Pensacola, outside the zone could be 20 miles. If you're down here, outside the zone could be 2 blocks. We don't know what it's going to look like yet. At this point, they're handling things on a case-by-case basis. I check routinely about once every 3 or 4 months to see if they've rejected anybody who was working, on an issue where part or all of the thing was just outside the zone. I have not heard yet of anyone being turned down. That is still one of the outstanding things that they have to deal with. Yes, sir. Just a second. That's very good. All right, thanks. And so that's one of the things that we're still dealing with, and we hope now that there's been a little bit more of an understanding of what's left to be done. We're kind of on the backside of COVID now. Folks are beginning to think about things a little bit more and what it looks like over the horizon. The expectation is that business is going to start to pick up. So the IRS is back to doing some planning on what it is they need to do to make these opportunity zones work the way we want to. Now, let's talk about the incentive side. That is hopefully part of the reason that we're all here tonight. The incentive is pretty robust. It is one of the few times where we actually put a tax incentive that is primarily interested in the money that we're talking about that wasn't scoped particularly to businesses, but individuals, small businesses like many of you are. The beauty of this program is it allows you to take your realized gain. So let's start with a simple number. Let's say, I just sold some stock and I got $10,000 in gain out of it. If I take that $10,000 and within 6 months of realizing that gain, realizing whatever that transaction was, if it was stock, if it was selling land, whatever that transaction was, and I put it into a qualified opportunity zone fund, I start immediately collecting benefits. First of which is I can defer my taxes as long as the money that is still in the fund. I can defer my taxes on that gain to 2026. Right? I don't pay any taxes until at least December 31 of 2026. If I leave my money in that fund for at least 5 years, I get a step up in basis of 10%. So using that $10,000 example again, at the end of 5 years, sell the property, sell the business, whatever that thing is, I will only have to pay taxes on $9,000 instead of the $10,000 of the gain that I originally realized. At the end of 7 years, my money is still in the fund. I then decide to liquidate the day after the 7 years has run up. I get another 5% jump up in basis. So now I'm only paying taxes on 85% of my original investment. So 10,000, I'm paying taxes on 8,500. But here is the true beauty of this piece for long range investors. If I keep that money in the fund for 10 years, all right, and up to 2047, which is right now the sunset date for this particular part of the piece, if I keep my investment in the fund for 10 years, I will get, and we'll talk about this some more, this is a generality at this point, not only the 15% basis in my original investment, my $10,000, but whatever my investment appreciated to. So let's say my $10,000 made $5,000. At the end of 10 years, when I go to cash that out, I get that 15% basis. I pay nothing on my $5,000. Right, so that's free to you to go run off and do whatever you want to, buy a boat, get a snack, whatever that is. So that is one of the things that they really wanted to press was what happens on the back end. We didn't want this to be one of those things where folks jumped in, made some quick money, liquidated, and ran out of the community again. We wanted folks to have a reason to stay around. We wanted folks to have a reason to want to be impactful in the neighborhood. We wanted folks like you to be able to do investment in your communities, realize the impacts of that, and to be able to then profit off of it as well. There's nothing ever that says that you shouldn't be able to make and enjoy your money and still do well by yourself, by your family, and by your community. Now, I will mention this at the start. We have passed the 7-year deadline. The 7-year deadline ended December 31st of 2019. But again, remember this ends in 2026. So the 7-year deadline has passed. The 5-year deadline is still in effect. So that 10% basis that we talked about is still available to folks through the end of this year. So again, using that 10,000 example, if you were to invest in a fund now, keep it in there through December 31 of 26, you get a 10% step up in your basis. Still sitting out there though, regardless of whether you make that date or for whatever reason, you don't until January 1 of next year, you still have at the end of the cycle that 10-year get, which certainly if you hit the right investment is considerable. Some of the other things that are important to recognize, like I said, the December 31, 21 deadline is fast approaching, but there is still time to get those investments made. But at the end of the day, it's not too late. I suspect, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, that there will be some incentives placed in there to allow folks who are kind of getting in late, because when I say late, COVID kind of knocked the socks off everybody. It's certainly put a dent in folks' investment in opportunity zones. But up till really that January of 2020, which both seems like so long ago, and just yesterday, I was telling somebody the other day, I work in the District of Columbia. I have been to my office a grand total of 4 times since March 20th of last year, including just last week was the first time I've been back in a while. That seems like such a terribly long time ago. But prior to us being in the state that we find ourselves, the impact on communities, despite the particularly slow rollout, because as I mentioned, from the time this bill actually passed in December of 2017 until the final regs came out was roughly October of 2019, it was almost 2 years before we got the final regs out. And those are the final regs. There were 2 iterations that came out prior to that, but they all came out in the same calendar year in 2019. Up until then, folks were flying blind, but they were still doing it. There was, as you can see, a considerable amount of impact, over 75 billion in private capital by the end of 2019. I use 2019 numbers because things came almost to a grinding halt during COVID, and rightly and understandably so. Folks were very cautious with what they did with their money, especially starting up with new capital ventures. The idea, however, is that things are getting ready to pick up again. And there's certainly a reason for that. That primary reason was folks weren't exactly sure what now President Biden was going to do about opportunity zones. There was some concerns that simply because it was a stamped Donald Trump initiative, that along with everything else, Biden would dump it. That was kind of goofy for folks to think that, but that's what the thought was. But what we have found very early on throughout, not only from the president's mouth himself, but in dealing with his staff over at Treasury and other places, they're not only accepting of opportunity zones, but excited about it and are looking to find ways to bolster it. They see that as the active ingredient to get that investment where it's supposed to go. Now, there's going to be some other tax incentives that were more credits than tax incentives, to be quite honest, that will probably go away as a result. As you've no doubt heard, the president has a list of things that he wants to do that require payment, and that payment is going to come down in the form of corporate taxes and capital gains taxes. I don't know about anybody else in this room. Fortunately, it's not going to include me. One day, hopefully, I will be able to get taxed and, damn the government, kind of thing. But not yet. We hope to get that. I hope all of you join me there. But the administration is particularly excited about the program and looking for ways to bolster it. It is, by and large, one of the very few programs of record that enjoys bicameral as well as bipartisan support. There are a few folks who deem it suspect. They are in the very, very, very small minority. The impacts that we've already seen from the program point to the idea that with just a little steerage, it's going to get exactly the results that we're looking at. Some of the other things that are going to push the program a little further is, as I mentioned, we expect that the IRS is going to get to work immediately. One of my former colleagues is actually working in one of the areas over at Tax Now, IRS, and she and I spoke about 2 weeks or so ago. They've already started working on the next set of regulation. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but that last little bit of clarity hopefully will give folks the confidence to be able to invest and not worry about all the different ways that you potentially trip and fall. They've clipped things off every little bit, but now there's just a few hanging threads that we hope that they'll get to. Certainly the idea that some of the tax increases that are coming are going to hit other areas where there are either credits or there are other incentives, leaving this to be one of the primary incentives that's left for people to go after. The idea that folks have a good chunk of change, and the market's been doing some weird stuff. My son, who's 20 now, got himself all excited because he invested in Bitcoin about 6, 7, 8 months or so ago, and he's just through the roof that it's made X number of dollars. It's like, well, at some point I'm going to have to invoice you for what you've been doing. But the market itself has been fairly bullish for the last decade and change, quite honestly. So there are going to be folks with the ability to put some money, both large and small, small amounts of money to large amounts of money, to move that around. So there's a lot of excitement around the idea that folks are going to go after. And finally, and most importantly, COVID. The last bill that went out, folks, we started referring to it as a COVID relief bill. That stopped happening somewhere probably around, I would say late March, where folks started looking at it as a relief bill. And not a relief for COVID, but kind of a rebuild. How do we start looking beyond the horizon? We're at the point, probably should have started this 6, 7 months or so ago, but we're at the point where we need to start thinking about how we, give a jolt back to our economy. How do we get folks back to work? Things have not been as bad as we all thought it was going to be, quite honestly, on the job side. There are certainly folks that are hurting. We got to figure out how to lift them up. But generally speaking, even in the state of Florida, the jobs numbers haven't been bad. They can be better. And we need to continue that growth where we are. If I get a little further in there, we'll talk about the types of qualified opportunity zone businesses that folks have been looking at, because that is going to be the next set of incentives that come out, is my belief. Is we jumped off with a lot of real estate transactions, and totally allowable and totally within the scope. That was not necessarily what was intended. The intention was to bring commerce into these areas, to bring social impacts into these areas. Real estate deals, while they are solid investments, don't necessarily create jobs. And so there is a lot of push, and you started seeing a little bit of the trending toward the end of 2019 to do exactly that, to start creating jobs and businesses and industry in an area that had been woefully without it for years. So there are a number of pieces of legislation that I expect, now that we kind of roll into the second quarter, we'll start seeing some of them do a little movement. Now, I will qualify this. I don't think I've ever seen as much stuff flying around at one time as I'm seeing flying around now. And I've been in this business either as my current capacity, or for the 15 years prior to that, so a total of closing up on 30 years now, as my hair will attest to. I don't think I've seen as much work going on. They will fight, and they will fight, and then there will be an opportunity that is probably only going to be 3 or 4 months long, where they will try to get stuff done. At the end of the day, there's 435 members of Congress and roughly 70 to 80 members of the Senate that have elections coming up in 2022. Got to get some work done. And there are ever narrowing areas of agreement. This is one of them. So I expect some of these pieces of legislation to actually get hearings, to actually get to the floor. From the restricted side, the only thing that I've seen, well, there's one bill that came out to end the program that's not going to see the light of day. It has no co-sponsors and really support for maybe 2 or 3 members, but even though 2 or 3 members don't want to put their name on it. But on the restrictive side, there's probably going to be a reporting requirement. There is not one now. There's not a whole lot of transparency. Different groups like the IRS, like Commerce, they have their surveys and things they do so they can get an idea of what people are doing in the market. Certainly have an idea from the amount of money that comes out of the Treasury, how things are, how successful those things are. But one of the things that at some point we're going to need to measure the success or failure of the program. And so that is what I do expect there to be at least 1 or 2 bills that are going to have to do with reporting requirements. And that's where things are going to get a little tricky. We'll talk about that in a second. But on the flip side, there has been a lot of discussion about where the zones are for some obvious reasons, some not so obvious. These were picked before a couple of storms, particularly in the state of Florida. Michael devastated the Panhandle, but there are only maybe 5 or 6 zones up in that area. There probably need to be 10 more. There's nothing in current statute that allows that. There's been some discussion, as I mentioned, you put these zones right smack in the middle of neighborhoods where you can't like move all the residents out so you can put up a pricky mark. And so there's going to have to be some workarounds to figure out how to deal with that. There's some bills out there to do that. As well as some other things, as well as bills out there to extend the date and timeline for some of the things we talked about. There was a definite stop in 2019. My feeling is that somewhere down the line, they're going to figure out a way to accommodate that lost year that basically took the 7-year stretch out for some folks. So I expect that there will be some robust activity from Congress on how to make this incentive work for more people and more communities. Another thing that's going to get dealt with is the formation of qualified opportunity zone funds. So when you move that investment, your $10,000, you're putting your investment into a fund. You're not putting it into a project necessarily, unless that fund is project-based. So the fund in and of itself is a business. It can be structured, just about however you want to, from S corps to, a single proprietor. It can be, and the only thing you have to do at present is a one-page form where you self-certify to the IRS that you are a qualified opportunity fund. It literally takes about 15 minutes to fill out. Consider the amount of money that's flying around, I expect that to change. But as of right now, that's the law of the land. For investors, I cannot say this strongly enough. One of the things that's going to be part of your due diligence is knowing who's running your fund. There are a lot of folks who opened up funds that know about as much about running a qualified opportunity zone fund as launching a rocket ship. And I know of at least one early on in the process, basically raised something like $16 million in a couple of weeks, missed all their compliance issues, put these folks' money in jeopardy. Now, his face was probably on the side of a milk carton shortly thereafter, because you can't play with people's money. But understand who these folks are. If they miss any of the compliance deadline, they put your money at jeopardy. They put your money at risk. They put you in peril. So you hear about a great project and, oh, these are the folks that are running the fund. Don't just go slap your money down. Find out who these folks are, what they do, what they've done to this process. At this point now, with the number of funds being well into the 400s at this point, you can find the ones who have done it before. And actually, right in this area, there are a couple of fund managers who are on their 4th and 5th raises, right here in Broward, but mostly in Dade County. And I'll make sure everybody in here has my contact information. So if you want any more information on fund managers, on projects, and say how to find projects, how to work all that stuff, I can get that to you. But continuing on, as I mentioned earlier, there are a couple of caveats about forming these qualified opportunity zone funds. The fund has to make sure that it draws at least 90% of its assets out of the QOZ property. Okay. The idea was to not have a Wendy's pop up, and most of their money is coming from 5 different other places, taking advantage of this incentive. We don't want them not to, and there were some regulatory issues that dealt with that kind of thing. But the idea was to make sure that the actual investment, the actual economic drive is happening inside the qualified opportunity zone. There are a number of other issues that I won't get into now, but again, don't hesitate to contact me to find out more information. The business property, that has been a question that has grown in ways that I do really appreciate. Like I said, initially, this was a lot of real estate transactions. Folks going and buying up property. There may not have been a building on it. Throw a building up, you substantially change the property and you can take advantage of the tax incentive. That typically helps the person who made the investment. Again, nothing wrong with that. But what they were hoping folks would do was take these properties, buy a dilapidated brownstone, fix that thing back up. Maybe it becomes affordable housing, maybe it becomes luxury housing. Take it and take a warehouse and create something out of it. Those kind of innovative things. There are a number of things that you can do in opportunity zones. Basically, the only things that aren't allowed are the sin activities that include banking, which I thought was kind of funny. But you can't build a casino, or a strip club, that like that, and you can't run a bank. But other than that, there are a number of uses and investment pieces that you can do. I always recommend to folks, be innovative, have some fun with this whole thing, work with the anchor institutions within your communities, work with your local governments. And I'm going to stress this throughout the rest of this presentation. The city of Miramar, Broward County, they're your friends on this whole thing. Make sure they're your friends on this whole thing. They want to be your friends. You have a mutual reason for being partners on this whole thing. Make sure you're working with them. It'll make your life easier. It'll make your projects run faster and smoother. And at the end of the day, not only will you hopefully make some money for your families, but you will have provided some socially impactful investment that you can look back on. The family's been here as long as you've been here, to be able to look back at what I refer to as legacy investment. That thing that your grandchildren and your children's children can drive by and say, you know, grandma and grandpa, you know, helped put that thing there, right? It sounds corny, but it's super important, and it's actually what this program was for. Making money is awesome. Having the legacy of knowing that you are part of a transformation of a community, that is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. And I can guarantee you that these great folks here, mayor, folks on the council, are wanting to help you get there. They're wanting to help transform things. I know Miramar is already 100% different than when I lived here a long time ago now. The place gets more and more beautiful every time I'm down here. There's certainly things we can do, and there's certainly swatches of area within Miramar that we can lift up, that we can make better, and make this a destination not only for businesses, but for other folks who want to come and kind of take it in and enjoy what we enjoy. Some of the things that I've seen that I really, really like, being a guy who deals with DoD so much, the research component is a big deal. Working with universities, if you can work with a university, or you can work with say a hospital group to plan activities within the opportunity zone. One, you have somebody to help you with capacity. If you work with the university, you always have folks within their business school or within other areas of what they work to be able to then help you with the things that you're doing. Incubators tie a nice little margin. It's also great for the university because it gives some hands-on activity for their not only the professors but their students. So they love doing stuff like that. And it's the exact type of thing that we want to do. It's job creation, it's industry creation. You know, so many areas that we've already seen, starting out with startup incubators and that kind of thing, you've all of a sudden built a cottage industry in an area that didn't have one. Some of the higher paying jobs come out of these incubators. So, you know, those things are really, really good. On the social impact side, there has always been a thought until recently that you couldn't do affordable housing as an investment. Wrong. There are folks within the state of Florida that are doing affordable workforce housing and making a tidy profit off of it and transforming neighborhoods by doing that. And so I encourage you, if you're looking at things, there are folks that you can talk to that can give you advice. If you have the funds to kind of start up a project like this yourself, certainly you will find ready help from the city, from the county, because it's a priority issue wherever you are in the country, affordable housing. And affordable housing doesn't have to mean Section 8. It just means that folks who are working class folks have a place to live that's quality, that builds up neighborhoods. The area that I live near in Virginia, they started doing this a few years ago, and it's an interesting study. They started putting Section 8 housing right smack in the middle of some extraordinarily, well-to-do, communities. In one area where they have public housing, directly across the street are brownstones that start at $2 million. And oddly, the community folks didn't fuss too much about it, but you can't tell the difference between the public housing and the brownstones right across the street. Folks was like, hey, it's the neighborhood I live in, I want my neighborhood to look nice. And they do it. Folks are now doing that with private money. And so we're not talking about, building slums. That doesn't help anybody. We're talking about giving folks a quality place to live. There's still a margin. There's still a profit to be made in doing the right thing. And it's not just as results from affordable housing. It's clean environment investment. It's, any number of those types of things. So do, when you're looking to make investment, find those areas like that. You'd be surprised what it will do for your bottom line as well as your heart. Now, operationally, as a result of COVID, some of the deadlines have been extended. If you've not already made an investment, those deadlines aren't going to mean a whole heck of a lot to you right now. But the the initial piece, they wanted to get the investment done really, really quickly. So you had, 6 months. From the 6 months after you made the investment, that fund had to put your money in service, shovel in the ground, get that done. The project had to basically be about done for anyone to take advantage of the incentive. It was too much. So they finally got some sense about them. They put it out 31 months. What you have to have in place now is a plan. That plan, there are jump off points where you can kind of redirect what the project is going to look like when it's going to be done. But the IRS basically wants to know that you have a plan to deploy people's money. That way the fund isn't sitting on the money and the money is in service as quickly as possible. I do think there's going to be some discussion about that timeline as well, because again, you have folks that missed an entire year and they'll want to get folks gin back up. Under the final guidelines, one of the things they discussed was at least 50% of the gross income of an eligible business had to come from inside. That number came down. It had been considerably higher. In the example I gave before, let's say someone owns 5 Mickey D's, and they have 3 of those Mickey D's inside the OZ, but 2 of them are outside, but it's one business. Prior to that rule, they would not qualify for the incentive. Since that 50% rule, they do qualify. All 5 businesses under one umbrella can receive the incentive. Again, hopefully at some point, if you're not already there, we'll all be in a situation where we're taking part of that and liking. And along that same line, they created the 70-30 rule. 70% of the activity of the business has to be located inside the zone. 30% can be located outside the zone. We're still trying to figure out what is outside the zone. And so hopefully we'll figure that out soon enough. One thing I will tell you, for those of you who might be considering running your own fund and investing in your own project, which is completely allowable to do, there is no chance that you're going to fundraise an entire project strictly with Opportunity Zone incentive funding. In all likelihood, you're going to raise 35–40% of your project based on the size of it, which still is a considerable chunk. But yet another reason why you want to work with the city, or you want to work with the county, with the state, with the federal government, is to take advantage of all the monies that are out there. So look at it this way. Conversation I have regularly when I talk to my city managers about getting money from the state and from the federal government. It's one thing to fill out an application and try to receive grant. Everybody in the country is doing that. And the folks who are looking through these things, it's going to have to be a pretty amazing project for them to put it over something else. What's that something else? It's painting a picture of what it is you're doing. Folks at EDA, folks at other parts of commerce, folks at USDA, folks that are in the infrastructure development business, they want to know that when you ask for money to help build infrastructure, that you have a vision to what that's going to do in your community. Throwing up a business that doesn't employ anybody and doesn't house anyone isn't something they're ever going to invest in. You're going to need their help. That's why you want to work with your city, to find out what is needed in the community, work with your county to find out that same thing, because where those things intersect, that's where you're going to find help from the state. You're going to find help from the federal government. When the city can come in and say, we are backing this project 100%, we're helping out however we can, and we'll talk about how help could possibly look, then the success of your transaction, the success of your business goes up 100-fold. You're going to want to use tax incentives, that are out there, new market tax credits, historic tax credits. You look at some of the areas within Miramar alone. We've been around here long enough where we're starting to hit the historic mark, and how to take advantage of some of those things. Low income tax credits, certain areas within the Opportunity Zone potentially fit that market. And I'll also tell you that you don't have to have a whole area be considered, a low-income tax credit area. You can parcel these things out. The IRS will work with you, USDA that actually helps administer that program. They will carve out areas, and they will carve out areas within an opportunity zone to help you qualify for those incentives as well. You can use typical financing means, debt financing or lease arrangements or any number of those things. Again, working with your city or county, they have assets. And sometimes those assets sit inside the zones. Sometimes those assets aren't being used for anything. I can't remember exactly now when they moved, this building, for those of you who've been long enough and remember this being City Hall. I don't know how long it sat empty after they closed it down, but an asset like this at the right time, it's a conversation you have with the city. Maybe you take out a 100-year lease and do whatever that thing is. You're working then with an asset, you're working with land. They get something out of it because they've got somebody in there that's, paying. It may be a public-private partnership that you agree to get some function going here. But there are a lot of unique and innovative ways to work these things out, so long as you're partnering with not only the community itself, but your public officials. As I mentioned, any number of other incentives, grants that will become available. You as an individual, as a private citizen, will not always be able to take advantage of those, but the city of Miramar can. Broward County can. The state sometimes can. So if your public entities take an interest in the project that you're trying to build, you're trying to create, that makes you more viable for other, financing that you're going to get. Quite honestly, man, if there's a way that you can get a project going where you don't come out of your pocket, that is gravy. If you can handle this whole situation where you can help your community and you can make sound investments and make some money for yourself and others, build commerce in your community, and you don't come out of pocket, that's a victory all day long and every day. So take advantage of all the things that are out there, but know going in that you're going to have to do it. This is not a panacea for investment. Don't think that. Right? So know going in that you're trying to raise what's going to get you a quarter, third of the way there. And you're going to have to do some other things to find the rest of that financing. Sometimes it's small enough where you can self-finance, whatever you don't raise. But know going in that there are going to be steps that you're going to want to do in your financing of the project. There are more than a number of ways to do that. I spoke a second ago about P3s. So my firm, the great folks that I work with, I'm not one of those, were pointing the spear and getting the P3 legislation passed back a few years ago. It is something that, to the extent that you can, especially on large projects, is kind of a win-win for both the public entity and the private industry entity. Gives you a chance to partner with the city, county, or state to provide some type of service that you can draw income from without the city or county having to figure out ways to finance it. And that doesn't work just for entities like your local governments, but with your anchor institutions, universities. My guys worked with LSU to do some mixed-use housing to the tune of about $500 million. The university spent no money other than what they paid the lawyers for handling paperwork and that kind of thing. And that project happened very, very quickly. It's up and running now. And projects like that, projects like the ones that you see on the board were P3 projects. So depending on the size of the thing you're looking at, maybe you're investing in a fund, but I have no problem talking to your fund managers. Hey, these are some of the things we need to look at. I've developed this relationship with my folks at the city, and I think if we do X, Y, and Z, we're going to have some friends. So let's look at a public-private partnership. There are any number of folks that are working in this area now. We are the best. That's my last plug. So at the city and the county level, I come from government, so my eye sometimes is to what the government, again, can do to or for you. This is a huge for you. It is important to the city of Miramar that they get activity going in these areas. It is important that they get the economy rolling, that they get folks in the proper housing, that they build jobs, that they build access. And as important, that they make Miramar a place folks don't just drive through, but come to, whether that's for dining or this, that, or the other. When I was a kid, you basically went and played in Dade County and you came home to sleep, you know, and you went over to the beach to play and you came back home to sleep. It would be great to have Miramar be a destination. This is an opportunity to do exactly that. And the city and the county have those same thoughts in their head about what they want to do. They've got that visioning, and working together with you and you with them, building a vision for what the community should look like needs to be a joint process. It really, really does. You know, again, the throwing a quickie mart thing up doesn't work if it's not part of a larger plan. And working with, you know, more than one head will give you some ideas about innovative ways to make money and build up the community at the same time. And it's win-win when it's done right, because there are things that they can offer you. Not only can they act as a convening authority for you to get you in touch with developers within the neighborhood, other like-minded folks that are looking for projects to invest in. They can help streamline your issues on zoning, on permitting. As I've discussed with a number of cities and counties around the state, that's how your local government can be of most value. There are a lot of time issues with this program. And if you get your permits locked up, you know, for 13, 14 months, you're kind of screwed. Right? But working with your cities, your counties, or whatever on some of these issues ahead of time, these are incentives. They're looking to get stuff done as well. And if modifying, you know, a zoning requirement or a permitting requirement or expediting permitting is something that they can do to get the right project, the impactful projects up and down, I'm not going to speak for anyone here or otherwise listening on the WebEx, but I feel pretty strongly that you will find, you know, folks willing to help. They have the ability to, as I mentioned, there are going to be things that as a private citizen that you won't be able to necessarily take care of, but the city can. And if, you know, this is a mutually agreed upon project, you know, that everybody's happy to get going, then all of a sudden you've got folks then that can ask for that money that helps your project along, either through incentives that they have here at the city or money they can request from the state or from the federal government. They're your friends. Where that intersection is most helpful is on the socially impactful investment. I hope that when you're looking at making an investment, you're doing so with an eye to how am I going to transform the community that I live in? Because ultimately, if you're investing here, you care. Because you can invest wherever you want to around the country. If you're investing at home, it makes sense that you want your neighbors to do well because that helps you. It gives you a quality neighborhood to live in, helps everybody's property values. You know, it gets jobs for your friends and your loved ones, your neighbors. And these are the things that are important. One of the things that the city can help you with, again, is creating that vision. That vision is going to help them get money. That funnels through the project. It helps you get additional money that you need for whatever that project is. So you can think a little bit bigger than your wallet might say otherwise. And that's the importance of creating that vision. It helps you to identify these zone-specific needs. Not everybody needs workforce housing. Most do, but not everybody. Sometimes it's about, we need this type of business in this area to take advantage of something that our university is doing. We need to be able to train a workforce to fill the hospitals that we have in the area so that we can deal with things like COVID when it pops up. It can be any number of things, but that's research that's going to be hard to do individually. There are folks who are doing that every day. There are folks within the community that are doing that every day that you're going to want to figure out and talk to. As we mentioned, figuring out what your available resources are is something you definitely want to do in conjunction with your local elected officials and entities. they have some idea what's available, either in in-kind services, again, in zoning and permitting, who the other folks like you are in the community. Hopefully these folks have started talking to them and they've been able to identify them. You may not know folks sitting in this room, but there may be a project that's big enough for you all to have a piece of it in, and you're not having to create some new project on your own, but you can go in together to do something that's going to work for Miramar. Who cares if anybody else comes and jumps in? That's great if they do, but at the end of the day, the folks who live here take care of the folks who live here. And so certainly do that. And it also helps, with that convening authority to understand what these priority projects are. What are the projects that can happen fastest, that can put your money to work fastest? Ultimately, that's going to be the thing that makes you the most money, that has the greatest chance of completion. If you're not starting from scratch, you're that close, to the finish line. Getting across the finish line means you're able to move on. You're able to take some of the earnings from that, put into other projects, and do well that way. So at the state level, Florida's a little behind. I have been working with Enterprise Florida, our de facto Department of Commerce, for about the last 8 months or so to help them develop their strategy for how the state's going to be involved in supporting opportunity zones. What at this point it's going to look like, to the extent that I'm allowed to continue working on this whole thing, is the state should be a help to not only local governments, but to you, the investors, in marketing your projects. It should be a help in helping you get the data that you need to make the right decisions about your investments. These are important pieces. If you go into something blind on the data, you find yourself losing money, and you can't get a step up in basis on zero. Zero is still zero. What was that? So nothing from nothing leaves nothing. The absence of data is going to have you in that category. And so that's going to be one of their issues. The other thing that hopefully they'll be able to do is, again, act as a convening authority. There may be folks inside the city that can help build up a project. Often you're going to have to go outside your area to find investors. That is one of the things that I want EFI to be able to do, is to connect would-be investors from outside of the state, inside of the state. The hope is, of course, that nobody kind of, eats its young and cannibalizes itself. We're pulling, investors from other states, not from within the state. But that is one of the things that I'm hoping that EFI will be able to do for you guys, for local governments. So look, hopefully by the fall, we'll start building that up. In the meantime, I've said it a couple of times. If there are questions you have, if there are resources you're trying to find, if there's connectivity that you need, do not hesitate to shoot me an email, give me a call. I'll point you in the right direction to where you need to go to do these things and give you whatever assistance I can. So the trick becomes, is an opportunity zone investment the right choice for you? It's exciting because if things hit, you make a lot of money. It's exciting because you have the opportunity to invest in things in your neighborhood or in your community. If done wrong, you cost yourself money, not just in the time value of money, that you've socked away money that ended up bringing back no value, but if you're working with the wrong people, they can get you in trouble as well as use your money. So some of the things you want to ask yourself: if it wasn't a good deal that made you interested before consideration of an opportunity zone project, it's probably nothing you want to invest in. If it's a good deal, it's a good deal. The incentive makes it a better deal, right? So make sure when you're doing your research, you're looking at it, you're seeing what they're trying to do, what they're trying to get done. Again, if it's not your own project and you're looking to invest in, another project that's ongoing, do your homework on that. Most of the reputable folks have their projects lined up in detail online, whether it's a city, impacted fund, whether it's a project-based fund, we're going to build a hotel. If it's an industry-based fund, we're going to set up incubators to do X, Y, Z. They will have a prospectus online. Check it out. Compare it to other things that you see around the country. Compare it to successful pieces that that you can look up readily. And again, I'll point to those resources to see, okay, this is what they did in Arizona. This is what they did here. This is what they did out at the state, in Tampa. This is what these guys are trying to do. Does it match up? That'll tell you exactly that your money's going to get some good work. If you're doing it yourself, do the same thing. Before you open up a fund, make sure you understand the viability of the project you want to get into. At the end of the day, this is a great thing only if it makes you money. If it doesn't make you any money, not only does it fail for you, it fails for everybody around. So it's always something to consider. That all falls into the second thing: perform your due diligence. Perform your due diligence. Perform your due diligence on the project, on the people you're working with, on the area. Make sure that the community is accepting of the thing that you're trying to do. Don't go in blind thinking that, oh, I'm going to put this up and everybody's going to love me. There are, how many folks do we have in there? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, whatever. We've got 9 different modes of thought. I guarantee it. And this is one small room, and then whomever's sitting out there. That's the beauty of our country. That can also be a pain in your behind if you don't check off with people and make sure that you have the community supporting what it is you're doing. It's very, very important. I've seen several of these projects fail because they started in on something and found out the community wasn't there and got run off. No doubt before the pandemic started, you may recall a certain member of Congress from the state of New York up in arms about the idea that Jeff Bezos was going to put an Amazon headquarters up in New York. And, she went to the mat on it, and Bezos decided not to move. Well, I'll give you a little backstory on that. He didn't move because, she ginned up the community against him, because it was really going to be roughly $28 billion in commerce that was going to happen as a result of that. They found out that they wouldn't actually be able to take advantage of the Opportunity Zone incentive because their money isn't made at that, that headquarters. It's made other places. So they're like, oh, you don't want to share? You're out. But had all things been even, she had ginned up enough of the community to run them out, despite the fact that I don't know what help it provided in running off, that much commerce. But certainly understanding who the players are and who's going to be adversarial and winning them to your position or finding out what they find is important to make sure you have the help is super important. Having professionals working with you is part of having the right supports. And when I say professionals, I'm talking about tax professionals. I'm talking about accounting professionals. One of the things that I do is I've worked with a couple of small businesses that operate their own fund to support their own projects and just helping them run through the compliance stuff. I felt comfortable doing that, but it is going to get trickier. And most recently, somebody was asking me, about something they're looking at doing about 10 months down the road. So talk to me then, because if they do what I think they're getting ready to do, I'm not your guy. You're going to need an actual, tax person who is familiar with the compliance requirements to make sure you're helped out. Accounting folks, talk to developers, talk to other folks who run funds. One thing that I have found is it's not nearly as competitive as you would think. Folks are very willing to help. They're very willing to give you information. Folks who do what I do, we talk to each other all the time about, well, what'd you hear about this? And it is such still a novel and nuanced area that everybody's willing to help. So don't hesitate when you're looking at jumping in on a project or starting your own. Find the people in the community, or just outside the community in Dade County, in Palm Beach County, or wherever it is. Get them on the phone. They'll talk to you. Folks love bragging about what they did right anyway. I do. Hey, I made $1 zillion. So folks are always willing to help out where they can in situations like that. So take them up on it. And again, work with your local governments. Work with folks who can get you the data that you need to move on. Because that's part of making sure you choose the right partners to help you out. So I've mentioned pretty much a lot of the things that are necessary when you jump into this whole thing. At the very, very, very core, collaboration. collaborate. Make sure what you're doing works for you, works for your family, works for your community. You will not lose if you do it that way. If you try to lone wolf it, that's when you're putting your money at risk and you're putting your neighborhood and your community at risk. So collaboration is the key to everything. Keep an eye, and that's where folks like me come in. I wouldn't have come down here if you guys didn't matter to me. I want you to not hesitate. You've got questions about, hey, dude, this is what I'm getting ready to do. Am I going to be able to pull this off? I may not know the answer right when you ask me, but I know folks who will. I'll know who to put you in contact with and who to talk to. I want to see you succeed. I want to see you make this community everything it can be, and I am more than willing and ready to help. Said I was going to give my last plug before, but my firm is actually headquartered right down the street over just off Broward. Our real estate practice, our construction practice, these are tops in the business, and we have a designated opportunity zone practice group. Call me if you're working on something big, you need professional help in that way. I can route you to the right guys, and I can route you to folks that aren't at my firm, tax attorneys and those kinds of folks to make sure you get the help that you need. All right, so I think I'm going to stop there, and if it's appropriate to do so, I will take whatever questions folks might have. Was I that good? Yes, ma'am. No, there is not. Sure. She asked if there was a minimum investment amount. Nope. Any gain, any realized gain. There has been some discussion about opening up to other forms of financing and investment that you have. But right now is any realized gain. You sell some stock, you sell some land, you sell one of your children, whatever it is. Any realized gain from $1 to a gazillion can be invested. Yes, ma'am. So the question was, what kind of return are folks typically looking for or getting? That really ranges on what it is you're doing. I'll be honest with you. If you turn that real estate investment, especially now, you can turn a nice, tidy 2-digit, return on the whole thing. But the thing that I want folks to keep in mind is you can turn a nice, tidy return on something that actually is a big deal to everybody in the community. Some of the, I keep coming back to affordable housing because it is one of the priority issues for just about every community. Some of these projects are awesome. I mean, just beautiful projects. And you're thinking, oh, this is quote unquote affordable housing. That term messes people up. It doesn't do justice to what some of these developers are doing now on that front. And of course, housing comes in a bunch of different ways. You look at workforce housing, or you look at university housing. That's a big deal. I think I mentioned I went to Florida State University, and between Florida State and FAMU, for a long time there was really nothing there. And then all of a sudden, folks got the idea that you can make really cool mixed-use housing. And this idea really started popping about 5, 6, maybe 7 years or so ago. So it wasn't just student housing; it was shops, it was restaurants, it was event spaces and that kind of thing. And it's hugely profitable. And it takes a lot of the pain off of universities trying to figure out how to expand and not have to build a $500 million building. If you can invite investors to do that. So there's a number of very unique and innovative ways to figure out how to make a nice return on these whole things. Again, do some investigating. Look to see what's happening in different areas. Try to find situated places to South Florida, because certainly the things that are going to be valuable and innovative here may not work someplace else, and vice versa. So take a look at those things and see what's going on. Yes, sir. Sure.
So I know the president now for up to $100,000 to be exempt from the penalty. I think that's about to expire. Is funding from there to go into opportunity zone qualified where you would waive that penalty?
Not yet. That is one of the issues that I think is being discussed now. The idea again is to, the administration is kind of going whole hog on this whole thing. They've got, friends in Congress to do so, finding out other ways to take investment capital and push it into the same area. To the extent that program is going to be allowed to sunset, I think the 1031 exchange is going to go away, where it's going to be greatly reduced and narrowed in how folks can use it. A couple others are going to go away with the idea that they'll either up the incentive to opportunity zones or whatever they will do to steer the investment there into some of the other similar tax credits that we currently have on the books. That's my feeling and thought anyway. And that's the signaling that we've gotten so far from the Biden folks.
Just one more.
Sure.
So if, let's say a person, you could sell from anywhere, including the international fund.
Mhm.
Sell pretty much anywhere, and bring that money to the opportunity zone. What if you have a project in the opportunity zone, and you use that funding to refinance, get to position yourself better financially?
There is nothing that prohibits that. Nothing that prohibits that as well. Now, the trick is if you already have property, if you already have a business inside the opportunity zone, it can't stay that business for the purpose of getting the incentive. So let's say you have a warehouse and you're stocking tires there. To take advantage of the incentive, you're going to need to find another purpose for that warehouse or make it something altogether different. Folks have gotten extraordinarily. This lady down in Miami, her name was Avra Jane. She's another one of those folks that you ever need to talk through something. She's magnificent. Avra is kind of the queen of taking warehouses and making condos and apartments, both luxury and affordable housing. She's probably done 4 or 5 projects now like that, but it has to change its function. And then you can kind of go to town, but you are able to, fund your own businesses. It just has to change function. Yes, sir.
100% of for the higher warehouse. If it was just a warehouse with tires previously, now it's going to be tires with apartments. Is that still a function of the property that those are these
Apartments. So the definition of substantially different is still kind of a work in progress. If it starts out as a warehouse and ends up a warehouse, just warehousing different things, no. It starts out as a warehouse, but then you use part of it, for, like you said, housing of some sort. And yeah, you can absolutely do that. A lot of folks are doing that in that mixed use, thing. There's a ton of it bouncing up in Virginia. Sorry about that. I forgot to.
The other question was, earlier on in the presentation, you mentioned the start, finish goals of the project on a redevelopment, building housing. When that's starting breaking ground? Or we talking architectural planning? When does that start begin and end, meaning end move-in date? Those build out projects now, 2 years. Past that, you seem to be floating around here. People want.
Yeah, and that's a very, very good question. So right now you have an option. You have 2 options. Option 1 is first dollar spent, start your time clock. Option 2 is the first half year that you come to. So there's 2 reporting cycles during the tax year. One in June, I think we're coming up on that one now, and then one at the end of the tax year. I think actually it's December 1st of the tax year. you can start your clock at the end of whichever one of those, or whenever you spend that first dollar. You'll have 31 months at that point. That's not 31 months, where you've got to have the whole thing built, but you have to have a plan that you're working toward. And that part is the part the IRS is going to look at. If you deviate from that plan, and you are allowed to deviate, you just got to, everything you do, it's one thing I should mention, everything that you do when you are the QOZ fund, as well as the project of the business, make sure you note everything. Keep all your documents, keep all your files. Certainly, if you end up having to pivot what the final project is going to be, you're going to need to be able to report that and explain it. Otherwise, you could compromise your entire incentive. But I'm going to have to get some clarification on the last part of your question relative to what signifies completion of the project. Because that's bounced around a little bit. So I'll let you have my card. If you wouldn't mind sending me that question, I'll get an answer for you. So I thought someone, sir, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Sure. Mhm. All right. So the next question, so if someone wanted to put money into a QOZF, not necessarily money that would result in gains, can that be done? And then the gains 10 years later is tax-free. So no, it's at this point, we're only talking about realized gains. It was a question this gentleman over there asked. That might change. They may start looking at, retirement funds or those kinds of things. But right now, it's only realized gains. And we'll see what that looks like, half year from now. The next question, how can a homeowner in an opportunity zone benefit from this program? Or is this strictly for business development purposes? So how you'll benefit from the program is making the investment. If you have some realized gain, again, whether it's $1 or $1 million, and you take that money upon realizing that gain, selling that stock, selling that piece of land or home or whatever that is. Once you realize that gain, you've got 6 months to put that into a qualified investment, a qualified opportunity zone fund. At that point, you take advantage of all the incentives based on the length of time that you leave it in there. For a lot of folks that think they can jump in real quick, look for some liquidity and get out, that's fine. You're going to pay taxes on a lot of stuff. You kind of could have gone anywhere and done it. That's not to say that there aren't some funds out there that are drawing a really huge return, and maybe you do want to jump in and jump back out. But that is not the objective, and it's not where you make the most money off of it. The next question, can one fund invest in multiple OZs? For example, the fund could develop housing in an OZ in Miramar and different housing or business development in an OZ in another city. The quick and easy answer to that question is yes. I don't necessarily advise it. It is better to go ahead and open up separate entities for a number of reasons. Compliance stuff is going to get super, super, super tricky. And you only have to miss something on one to mess it up on the whole deal. And again, if you're taking in investment and you lose someone's money, you're going to have a hideaway. So it's usually best to go ahead and open up the fund for the project they're going to, especially now if they're both, if all the projects are inside, the opportunity zone in Miramar or wherever else, that's one thing. But if you're talking about a project here, project in Tampa, a project in Arizona, and you're the fund manager, I highly advise against that. Any other questions? Well, it has been my absolute pleasure to be down here. And again, I want to be helpful. I want you to please take advantage of, my being able to help and answer any questions that you have. I'll make sure you have my card. Otherwise, thank you so much for spending some time with me. Wait. Okay. By the way, anybody who shoots me an email, if they want a copy of this PowerPoint, I'll get that over to you. At some point, I'll probably have it posted on our website, but I'll shoot you a hard copy of it on request. So the question was, could a single-family home be made into a project to convert to a townhome or a multifamily dwelling? Excuse me. Yes, is the short, quick answer. Better on the multifamily house side than changing one house to another house. That is not going to be considered a substantial change, despite changing it to, from a house to a brownstone. But if you make it a multifamily piece, then you're going to be, more likely going to have rents and renters and that kind of thing, or other buyers. That you can do, the former not. All right. Well, again, hey, thank you guys so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. And hope to talk to you guys all again soon. Have a good night.
Thank you for being here, and those of you who are online, we have your information through your registration, and we could email the document to you. And Mr. Williams is going to provide business cards to those who are present. We thank you for being here. We hope you learned something more about opportunity zones and how you can benefit as a property owner. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.